One day when I was about 2 or 3 years old, my family went to spend a day at the beach. At the beach, we had a view looking right at the sleeping giant. I just felt kind of compelled to keep looking back at it, and there's something about it that just seemed to draw me to it. And after a while, I had this sense of a mystery that was tied into it, and the whole idea of whether the sleeping giant was sleeping or was perhaps dead. And then I had this sense of the whole idea of dying as being like a sleep. And it's like something like I had been told something long ago about that when you die, it's like you go to sleep. And when you wake up, you're a baby. And I remember at one point looking up at the sleeping giant and remembering something about something that had happened, a mystery that had happened in the skies behind the sleeping giant, out over the lake, something that had happened long ago, but I couldn't remember anything what it was.
On a cold evening in November 1953, a jet was scrambled from Kinross Air Force Base in northern Michigan to intercept an unknown object over Lake Superior. Ground radar tracked the jet merging with the bogey, the two dots becoming one. The one dot then disappeared from the scope. The jet, its pilot, and his radar operator were never seen again. The Kinross incident, as it became known, acquired legendary status as one of the more intriguing UFO stories of the 1950s. 9 months and 1 week after it occurred, a son was born to Doug and Jean Heath in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Growing up, the boy had many inexplicable experiences. A UFO sighting in 1999 unleashed a flood of memories that seemed to tie them together. Strangely enough, the memories were not just from his own life. They were also from the life of Felix Eugene MONCLA, the pilot of the doomed jet.
Grand Marais is probably the key incident that seems to pull all of the connections with the Kinross incident into my earliest lifetime memories. Grand Marais is a place that I seem to remember from when I was a kid. Associated with those memories is a memory of climbing a hill. The other part is that there's someone I climbed the hill with. It's a man. When we got to the top of the hill, I was quite tired and very hot. It was actually a very sunny day. So we got to the top and the man said to me, "We can stop here and rest for a while." At that point, he starts telling me, he points out back off to the hills and says, "A long time ago, an airplane flew out over those hills, way out over the lake." And I said, "Did it crash?" And he said, "No, it didn't crash. It went inside a spaceship." And then he says to me, "And you were the pilot." And I'm thinking, well, how can I be the pilot of an airplane? I'm just, too young or whatever. And I say to him, well, I'm too small to be the pilot. And he says, "Well, when you were with me, you were a man just like me."
The pilot of the missing jet, Felix Eugene MONCLA, hailed from the bayou country of central Louisiana, where the town that bears the family name is today mostly a memory. He wanted to be a doctor, but after a year of med school joined the service and trained as a pilot. He married a pretty southern girl and was sent to Truax Air Force Base in Madison, Wisconsin to fly F-89 fighters. He was on a 2-week rotation to Kinross near Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, when he was scrambled that fateful night in 1953. Gord Heath was born a little over 9 months later in Thunder Bay, Ontario. He was living in Vancouver in the late 90s when he saw a UFO from his suburban balcony.
Something that went over very, very quickly across the sky. And when it stopped, all I saw was what looked like a light in the sky. I watched it for some time and it just stayed hovering in the same spot. Through the binoculars, it looked like it was kind of a silvery gold color, spherical, and it was kind of funny because I had this sense like it was maybe watching me.
The experience got him interested in the UFO phenomenon, and he began reading up on its history. When he came across the Kinross incident, bells went off. It resonated with a number of strange occurrences stretching back to his early childhood.
When I was maybe 3 years old or something, and I was just playing out in the front yard one day, I felt like something was looking at me. So I looked up into the sky. It was quite small. It was there, and then it just seemed to move off. And I told my brothers I thought it was a flying car. And they, of course, thought I was crazy. When I was about 2 years old, I had a series of recurring nightmares. The man, the moon, comes down and he takes me with him. So what happens at that point is I just start trying to call for my father, but I'm absolutely paralyzed. And just at that point, I'd wake up. There is one very puzzling incident, and one that even puzzled my brother, that happened when I was 7 years old. I had actually seen this jar earlier because my dad used to bring it out and showed us these little model planes that he made when he was in the Air Force. And we were all very fascinated with them. My dad kept this on the dresser in my parents' bedroom. I remember this one day, my parents are not in the house, and I wanted to see the model planes. So when I opened it up, yes, the model planes were in there, but there were all these other badges and patches that were military. And when I looked at these two ID badges, I thought, well, something's wrong, because how can it be my dad's when it's two different names? And the first one I found quite easy to read because it was consonant, vowel, consonant. And by the time I figured it out, I thought Wilson, I immediately associated with Mr. Wilson on Dennis the Menace. And then the second name was just very hard for me to figure out what it was. But I was able to break it down and figure out how the name was pronounced. And I came up with the name MONCLA. Once I got the name, I kept repeating it to myself. And there seemed to be something there that for some reason I felt I should remember, but I couldn't. My father had some serious pains and had to get a bypass operation. But he had intravenous on him, and he had, I guess, something in his throat. I'm trying to remember. He couldn't speak.
I don't remember him being there. I remember Jean being there and the nurse, but I don't remember him being there.
And it's sort of like he's doing this charades, and he points, me, not you, son. And then I said, I am not your son. And then he had like this big smile on his face, and he was nodding his head like this.
I don't remember doing that. The thing I remember happening there was I looked up at the nurse, and I went,
What does that mean?
no halo. I was still alive.
I remember the nurse was actually trying to get him to kind of settle down a bit because she was worried about him getting so emotional. Anyway, she gives him a little pad of paper, and he writes a name down and hands it to me. Well, I recall it as, and I must say this is not as vividly as when I was
reading the names on the in the badges, or when my mom addressed me as Eugene. But I remember the names as being Eugene MONCLA. First MONCLA written down like this on across paper, and then above it, Eugene. And what I remember is I took that piece of paper with me and I put it in my wallet. And then we went home, and when I was driving my mom home, we were kind of silent about it. She just sort of said to me what I was sort of thinking at the time was, it must have been that he was the medication, the painkillers he was on. To me, it's the mystery of all these little things, that seem to just weave through my life. And then there's the mystery of what happened to MONCLA and Wilson.
The mystery of the Kinross incident and the strange recollections from his own life pushed Gord into a flurry of research. He mounted his own website and began to devote his vacation time to visiting the places where Gene MONCLA had lived, photographing whatever he encountered. And the memories began to come, not just vague images, but detailed recollections of the life of Gene MONCLA, and clues that Gene MONCLA might be his genetic father. The day of the UFO intercept, the last day in the lives on Earth of Gene MONCLA and his radar operator Robert Wilson, began with a strange and tragic coincidence.
Gene MONCLA arrives on base and reports for duty. He finds out that an F-89 has crashed back in Madison, and it is his neighbor and his friend, John Schmidt, who was killed in the crash. They had been on radio silence for about 10 minutes, and suddenly the plane went into a dive from about 40,000 feet, and then turned over and dove into the marsh just across the lake right over here. A lot of people just heard a thud, and then there was an explosion. Lieutenant Bill Mingenbach asked Gene if John Schmidt was a friend of his. Gene shrugs it off. There's not much he can do to deal with all the emotions that are really just churning around inside of him. And so the time just passes. It just seems to drag on, actually, for him. All of a sudden, the alert horn sounds, and it's sort of a wah, and Gene just jumps up. He picks his wallet out of his flight suit and just places it on the table. And he's actually looking into the eyes of Lieutenant Bill Mingenbach, and doesn't really say anything as he turns and heads out. Maybe he felt he knew something was going to happen. What? I don't know. And they're in the plane and heading off on the intercept mission.
We searched with our radar for that aircraft. We couldn't find nothing. The bogey must have been around 7,000 to 8,000 feet. No doubt, Gene MONCLA was letting down through these layers of clouds that we observed on our way up. Gene had vertigo, and he had some difficulty with orientation when he was flying on instruments. And so my guess is that Gene MONCLA became somewhat confused and disoriented, and his aircraft went into Lake Superior.
The same conclusion was reached by the U.S. Air Force accident investigation, although no pieces of wreckage were ever sighted. But what about the UFO, the bogey in the parlance of the Air Force, that the jet had intercepted? The report claimed it was an RCAF C-47 transport flying from Winnipeg to Ottawa, and that the plane had been tagged an unknown because it was 30 miles off course. Something the pilot of that plane makes no bones about contending.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. To be 30 miles off course, I've been 30 miles off course in my entire flying career.
My memory is that Wilson tells MONCLA they are approaching Canadian territory. He asks if he should continue the intercept. And of course, Gene was not going to turn back. So they continued on, and it's at that point that they start doing their descent. They make another course change, and this is now aligning them up for the intercept. It's only at the last minutes that they actually see anything. He knows what he's coming up to is something not from this world. It's no longer a question of him doing his duty or anything, it's him surviving. He grabs his control stick and tries to make a banking turn. And there's just no response from the aircraft. He shouts back to Wilson, my stick's stuck, try yours. He fires, and there is an explosion. When he comes to, he's lying on his back. All he's thinking is, where's the plane? And then I guess his eyes open, and he's looking around him, and that was just complete shock. He's all of a sudden very conscious of the fact that he's part of something that the Air Force knew something about and didn't tell them what was going on. He's dealing with the reality of facing what was to him an alien being. They say, you shouldn't have fired on us, you killed two of us, or something like that. And he's immediately, Gene's just thinking things just got a lot worse. He's only conscious for a very short period of time. When he wakes up again, he's all of a sudden remembers what's happened. He asks about Wilson, and he's told that Wilson's being kept somewhere else in the craft. And he is told what his choices are. Of course, he wants to go back. And they're telling him, no, he can't go back. They're not going to let him go back. His choices are, one is to go with them, and the other is to come back to the planet in a totally different identity, a new identity. And he's taken to a place where he's to announce his decision, and there's Wilson is there. And he's asked what his decision is, and he says what it is. And Wilson's just absolutely devastated, as Wilson had decided to go with them.
When Gene MONCLA was transferred to Madison, he and his wife Bobby and their two young children rented at a modest apartment complex where many of the Air Force pilots resided.
What I can remember here is that MONCLA's family occupied the second floor apartment that's on our right side here. Yeah, just very strange because just a small bathroom. I can remember actually him being in here one time where he was doing his business and his son was pounding on the door trying to get in, and his wife was telling him to hurry up. There was a pilot who left his home and didn't get back. And his family who just had to sort of put their lives together and deal with it. I'm always looking at this one particular picture when I'm 3 years old and I'm sitting down somewhere. As soon as I look into this picture, I'm going back in time and I'm thinking about this event where I'm going up. I went up this hill, and it's only after I connected with this whole story years and years later that all of a sudden one day I was looking at the picture of Robert Wilson, the radar operator who disappeared. These memories just started coming back to me. Me being on the hill with him and exactly what he was wearing, this blue shirt. And I asked him, did it crash? And he said, no, it went inside a spaceship. That's what I remember him saying.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Boy, that certainly makes our last murder kind of dull.
Yes.
Oh, there was a murderer here, was there?
Claimed that he disappeared and that mother hugged him and he came back, but I don't remember.
Where did the family used to go for vacation?
Oh, we'd go down to any place close by. We didn't travel much. We went to Oliver Lake.
And I'd ask my parents about this. I'd say, I know we were looking out over Lake Superior and I can't remember who the man was. And my father would say, oh, you must be referring to the vacation we did to Oliver Lake. Grand Marais, I can't remember us ever going to a place called Grand Marais. For sure, there is no documentary evidence whatsoever that we were ever at Grand Marais. He's told that he's going to meet his parents. And he's asked, well, do I have any choice about this? And they're saying, why is he concerned about that? And he says, well, maybe I might not like them or whatever. So I remember that he meets my mom first. And things go okay, but I think he has some misgivings or something.
What?
I think that he found out that he was supposed to be fathering his next incarnation. And he was kind of concerned about how that was going to happen, and he learned that it was going to be artificial means. And to my recall, they actually did artificially extract semen from him.
The story he tells, he has Jean and I visiting, and it was just a time we had Barry, I guess. So they knew, I guess, that we had pretty good parents.
Neither of Gord's parents ever recalled being aboard a craft or ever having met Jean MONCLA, or for that matter, ever having been anywhere within 500 miles of him. But Gord has memories that he believes could indicate otherwise.
I seem to remember my dad saying something to my mom like, it's not real, and telling her that they'd put you in a mental hospital or something if you told them. What I recall is that some weeks after that my mother had brought this gift to MONCLA, and it contained shaving implements. It was men's toiletry set. Now what happens is there's what goes into the jar. There's the ID badges. There was the Model F-89. What I seem to remember is MONCLA made that. Wilson comes over because he's going to sort of say goodbye to him because it's the last night or whatever. And when he sees that he's done this, and he asks him why he's doing it, and he says, well, because he wanted to have something to remind his next incarnation, whatever, of who he was and where he came from. And so Wilson says, well, he wants him to remember him, so he takes off his ID patch and gets him to put it in the jar. But he also had with him a diary, and they wouldn't let him give MONCLA the diary. So after that, we now get, this basically is the same day, later the same day, and it's the end. All I remember is that my mom and dad were there, Wilson was there,
there were some aliens there doing something. He's told to go into this kind of a tank, or I don't know how to describe it. He was worried about the fact that he was going to drown, because he knows that there's some sort of a transformation happening where he's somehow going to go from one body into another. And that's basically the end of his, he goes down into it, and I think he just basically goes to sleep. He's cold and he goes to sleep.
How attached are you to the truth value of these memories?
The validity of the memories. First of all, that's the most important thing. Is truth is a harder thing. Validity is, where does that memory come from? Is it something that was real, or where is, or is it just something that was subconsciously generated as a result of curiosity or whatever, how the mind might work?
You found out, for instance, that you're not related genetically to Jean MONCLA. Would that bother you?
Well, I guess it's more a question of which would bother me more.
Gord agrees that it would be very interesting to do a test to determine if Jean MONCLA could possibly be his genetic father. While he contemplates how the results, either positive or negative, could affect his life, startling news is claimed by a dive company exploring the bottom of Lake Superior.
Oh, wow.
Can you make it?
I can see it.
Make it.
In late August of 2006, a group calling itself the Great Lakes Dive Company appears on the internet and claims they have imaged Jean MONCLA's F-89 Scorpion on the bottom of Lake Superior in Canadian waters.
Oh, God.
So you can see the one, there's
The
the
tip tank?
the wing.
Gord
There's
informs
obviously
Bill
the
Mingenbach,
nose.
who flew the first search plane.
And then this is the shadow of the tail.
That sure looks like an 89, is what's there.
But the Great Lakes Dive Company claims that they have also found a large tear-shaped metal object near the plane that has strange properties, making it impossible to normally image on their sonar. Furthermore, they say that the object has a dent in it that matches the F-89's missing wing, but they won't reveal the location or any other details, citing ongoing negotiations with television networks and the Canadian government. Nevertheless, Gord feels MONCLA's relatives, who he has met on his previous journeys, need to be informed.
With all this stuff happening now, it just sort of like, I know it's got putting me through and wondering, well, for people who have been waiting for 50 years to find out
the truth.
Yeah.
Or something. Well, I believe anything's possible.
I do think it is important to find out what actually happened.
Definitely.
As Gord heads south towards Louisiana and the historical roots of the MONCLA family, the Great Lakes Dive Company, their website, and their spokesman mysteriously sink out of sight, leaving Gord and many UFO researchers to wonder if their revelations were nothing more than a hoax.
All right, we'll see you.
Compounding things, Gord receives word that his father has suffered a fatal heart attack, and he flies back to Canada for the funeral. The investigation into the source of his memories, into the question of who Gord Heath actually might be, has taken on much more significance.
I feel like I want to go home.
Many of Gord's memories aboard the craft occurred during hypnosis that he decided to explore after his studies of the Kinross incident began to connect the dots through many unusual events in his life.
Large eyes, large black eyes.
But psychologists believe that there are potential problems with the recall of events during and even following hypnosis.
Face doesn't have too much expression, but to me it looks unfriendly.
Hypnosis seems to increase the overall volume or production of memories. The downside is that there's a trade-off for accurate memories, there seems to be a trade-off in inaccurate or confabulated memories.
Have you decided for yourself at this point, one way or another, what your memories mean?
Well,
there's a tangible sense that, yes, this man is a participant in a very real phenomenon. And yet we have to weed out, well, what memories make sense and what can be validated, and how do you look at this in terms of different dimensions of reality, because clearly some of his encounters are not in ordinary material reality. Do you have a sense that you are the reincarnated Gene MONCLA, or?
Well, I guess I definitely entertained that as a pretty, what's implied by my memories. Okay. And I tend to put more emphasis on the ones which I've experienced from this life, whatever. But I do find it interesting to go back through and look at the those things that seem to be past life memories I've had at different points in my life, and then there's the ones which have just come about as a result of visiting places or meeting people or seeing documents or pictures or something, photographs that are from his time and his life.
Have you been here since the plaque was put on?
Well, the plaque was put on when I was here last time. It was...
how many years that's been, Gordon?
That was 2002 I was here.
You were 2002?
Yeah.
Okay.
Was it Leo? Which one was... There was one who was a pilot.
Dr. Budge, the doctor.
Yeah, is that Marilyn's older brother then? Or?
Yes, Marilyn's older brother. Marilyn died.
But that's right, because I met him at Marilyn's place, and he was the one who sort of inspired Gene to be a pilot.
Right, and he lived he was born in Hamburg, but he lived in Moorville, and he and his wife, she was a nurse, and they had the Baradon Clinic in Moorville, dance hall upstairs in those areas, and growing up at that time.
Any narrative that you or I may have, it's determined by multiple influences. Who we are, what we know, what we want to believe. So the way I think about this is in terms of possibilities, and several things come to mind. A question is, what role would fantasy proneness play? From our research, we've learned that fantasy-prone people tend to report very, very vivid memories of childhood. They tend to tie memories and experiences together into rather elaborate, imaginative scenarios. Certainly, one might characterize Gord's scenario as imaginative, as well elaborated, as tying different elements of his experience together.
This was many, many years back, and all I can remember is in the dream, it was my grave or something, and there was a large cross, and I believe Christ on the cross. I think it was at least 10 years ago, maybe more, but it was a very memorable one. This is the house where Gene lived when he was first born. When Gene was still quite young, about 4 or 5 years old, his father got ill. He became quite catatonic. He would just sit and wouldn't talk, very non-responsive. I sort of when I was told about this, I seem to have a memory of Gene as a very young boy, going up to his father being sitting in a chair, and I think Gene had just been told that they were going to be taking his father away. And Gene was very, very upset about this, and he put his arms around him, and I remember him saying something like, "Why don't you talk? Why don't you talk?" Gene's father, Felix Eugene MONCLA Sr., is buried just over here. How he was violent? I don't know if he actually was physically violent towards them, but I think that there was a sense that he was unpredictable enough that you felt unsafe being in his presence.
In terms of your childhood or your upbringing, was there any specific trauma or traumas what was your childhood like? Was it?
Well, I guess there was the traumas associated with some degree of physical child abuse. My mother was bipolar. She'd have her up periods and then her sudden down.
How much did she hurt you, or physically?
Well, quite a bit. There were some, maybe it was just sort of kind of at different levels at different times, but it also was just created a sense of never really feeling quite secure.
There is some research, I mentioned it in the book, by Kenneth Ring, and they found somewhat of a higher incidence in people that have had near-death and UFO, either-or encounters, and an increased incidence of maybe some childhood trauma or abuse. Right. Not to the effect that he's saying that this makes people dissociate to a pathological degree, but maybe that trauma can set you up so that you can actually be more in tune with what other these subtle realms or whatever these altered experiences are.
It's difficult to answer how a bipolar mother would affect a child. The fantasy proneness is really something that comes about in a number of different ways. One pathway is parents encouraging fantasy. However, we found that another pathway was through physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, where children tended to cope with those kinds of negative experiences by developing a kind of a compensatory fantasy life. This narrative he's developed, truthful or not, does seem to give his life a great deal of meaning. After all, he has two fathers, and he is really two people now, with special knowledge that other individuals don't have. And it makes him very distinctive as a person and confers upon him positive attributes like bravery and also a real discoverer, someone who is trying to learn and deal with really important questions. And a really important question is there life elsewhere? Are we alone?
What happens after you die?
That's another one. Obviously an important question.
Felix had a twin brother, Robert.
Perhaps Gord is fantasy prone, perhaps not. Labels make it all too easy to oversimplify things, reducing strangeness down to the level of our comfort zone. A case in point. Gord's father was a twin, as was Jean MONCLA's. Gord's mother suffered from depression, as almost certainly did Jean's father. Gord's mother's name was Jean. The parallels are strange, if not eerie, and if they fit the label of coincidence, it's a forced fit. But among all the strangeness, what is factually testable is whether Jean MONCLA was Gord's genetic father. With the cooperation of an anonymous male relative of Jean's, Gord goes to do the test.
There's a lot of strange coincidences. Jean's father was a twin. Jean's father and his twin were both teachers. My father and his twin were both teachers. Maybe it's maybe it is on some underlying level. There's an affinity. Yeah.
I mean, I enjoyed talking to him, and he's had a lot of information, and it's been, it's been interesting and stuff. It's just that I'm not sure I believe that he's my father reincarnated or whatever, and I mean, if we find out differently, I'll be very shocked, but I just don't, and I don't want to hurt his feelings. That's not the thing. It's just that, I don't believe in that right now, and so, all my friends and family are like, don't talk to him, when he calls, and I just think that he needs someone to relate to in the family, because I think that that's important to him, and so I do talk to him when he calls and stuff. He did call me one time. He was very upset. Is this still on film? Yeah. Anyway, and he was like real late in the middle of the night, and he was real upset. I do remember this now, and he kept saying, "You're not telling me what I need to hear," and he was crying and all this stuff, and I was like, what do you need? I was like, what do you need to hear? I can't tell you something that he's either not real or I don't believe or, you know, whatever. But I think he was having a really hard time then. That was probably about a year ago, though.
Does the whole thing, your edifice of memory, collapse if the test is negative?
No.
Certain things you already know are false.
And certain things I know are true.
Such as?
Well, what I had always known right from the beginning was, I shouldn't say from the beginning, but from long before I had knowledge of this, was that Jean was looking forward to going back to school, to university. And it was only when I actually read the article, the account that was written in the Avoyelles journal, where his mother was interviewed, and she talks about talking to him and how he was looking forward to going back to school, to being a doctor. And that part I didn't know, him being a doctor, but I did know that he wanted to go back to university.
Look at that, those houses, they're just completely gone.
Let's just examine the possibility right now of the results of the test. If the results come out negative, how is that going to change your life?
The negative result would be easier for me to continue my life as is. I don't know how my life would be affected by a positive result, but I would think that it's going to have a greater effect on me. Yeah, because I can sort of shrug off very easily a negative result and just sort of say, well, okay, memories are at a minimum have potential faults in them. Yeah, maybe I'm going to want to ignore it. Maybe I won't be able to ignore it. Maybe I'll have opened the Pandora's box, my own Pandora's box, right? And maybe that's why there's all this emotion erupting over this whole question, right? Is there's complex issues involved either way.
So it is DNA test report, sample 1, sample 2.
What does it say, Gord?
Y chromosome STR testing was done to determine relatedness of Gordon W. Heath and MONCLA. According to the information obtained from the testing, the results are consistent with individuals that do not share a common male lineage. So, negative test result. And I'm just looking at what it's, all the information there is just numbers, whatever, but so that's what it says. What does it all mean? I don't know. There's just some mysteries out there that maybe we can't answer. They just have to stay a mystery.
Yeah, well, what would still remain mysterious?
Oh, the whole thing. What happened to MONCLA and Wilson back in November 1953. Why I remember what I do, or what it is that actually was going on that day when I visited my father in hospital is a very key one in my mind. I don't think I'll get an answer to that one, because I'm the only one who has memories of anything that happened there now. He was writing down the name, right? Writing down a name, then the question becomes, what was that name?
Which you can't remember.
Well, I thought I could remember, right?
Much of what we recall, from breakfast 3 days ago to important events in our lives many years ago, is suspect. Life is a process of making meaning, of understanding oneself on the basis of the best available evidence, but that available evidence is often skewed by this tendency to organize the self along themes and narrative lines. So it's simply the way most minds work, if not all minds work.
To me, from the beginning, the more predominant question was this feeling of a connection to the conscious continuum that I perceive since I was very young. This idea of there being something before I was born. Whether it's subconsciously, I've just taken MONCLA and filled it in there, I feel some affinity for it.
In spite of the DNA test and the suspect memories, there remains the almost preternatural connection that Gord feels with the life of Jean MONCLA. Perhaps it's only because of the strange congruence of coincidences. But possibly it points to something else. That maybe there is something about us as human beings that allows us to feel and maybe sense things about the lives of others that extend well beyond the confines of our own narrow individuality. As he walks along the beach, a line from a song occurs to Gord. Later, he will look it up and discover that Ebb Tide was number 3 on the hit parade in November 1953 when Jean MONCLA disappeared. When asked if he could have come across that information during his previous research, he replied that it was possible.
First the tide rushes in, it's a kiss on the shore, then rolls out to sea, and the sea is very still once more.